HOA cops handcuffed my wife over lights, and that's when everything changed. You won't believe what happened next. We didn't just take revenge, we destroyed her 17 Harleys. But that wasn't the end. What they did to us next, you have to see it to believe it. The HOA president thought she was untouchable, but she never saw this coming. Welcome to HOA Secrets Uncovered. I'm Mark, and today I'm about to tell you one of the most shocking stories in the world of HOA conflict. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, but as you'll see, it's anything but peaceful. I'm a guy who's seen the worst of HOA power trips, and believe me, this one takes the cake. So sit tight, because things are about to get messy. Grab your popcorn, because it's time to uncover the dark side of the HOA. I never saw it coming, not in a million years. It all started like any other day. The sun was shining, kids were playing, and we were putting up our Christmas lights. It was a simple thing, really. Just lights, some tinsel, and a bit of holiday cheer. But that's when I saw her. She was walking down the street with that clipboard, the one she always carried. At first I thought she was just another neighbor out for a walk, but something about her presence felt different. She was tall, wearing a sharp jacket, and the way she walked, no one else moved like that around here. It was like she had a purpose, like she was on a mission. When she reached our house, she stopped in front of the lawn where I was hanging lights on the bushes. I had just plugged in the first string, and it lit up, casting a soft glow against the evening sky. She didn't smile, not even a hint of warmth in her expression. Instead, her eyes were cold, calculating, like she was analyzing every move I made. "You can't do that," she said, pointing at the lights. Her voice was as calm, but I could hear the authority in it. I blinked, confused. "What do you mean? They're just Christmas lights," I said, laughing it off. But she wasn't laughing. She didn't even look amused. She glanced down at her clipboard, scribbling something, and then looked back up at me. "You need to take those down," she said, her tone now more serious. I laughed again, thinking it was some kind of joke. I mean, who could possibly care about a few lights on the house? But she wasn't joking. She was dead serious. I looked at my wife, standing in the doorway, just as confused as I was. "Is this some sort of joke?" I asked again, raising an eyebrow. "No joke," she replied. Her eyes never left me. "I'm not sure I understand. Is this some kind of new rule or something?" I was starting to feel a little irritated. We were just trying to celebrate the holidays. "We have rules around here," she said, her voice becoming colder. And then she showed me the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen, a piece of paper with the HOA regulations. It was all about light placement, brightness, and some obscure rule about keeping the peace with neighbors. Apparently, our lights were a violation. I stared at the paper in disbelief. "Are you serious?" I asked. "Those lights are fine. No one's ever complained before." She didn't answer. She just stared at me like I had committed some major crime. And in that moment, something clicked. She wasn't just some random neighbor. She was the HOA president, and she was wielding power like a weapon. "I'm going to have to fine you," she said. That was the moment everything changed. I had dealt with HOAs before, those petty rules, the constant complaints about lawns, and the way people acted like they owned the whole neighborhood. But this felt different. This felt like personal revenge, like she was taking out some kind of grudge on us. "We'll pay the fine," I said, trying to brush it off. But she didn't seem satisfied with that. "I'm not here for the fine," she said, her voice icy. "I'm here to make sure you follow the rules." I had a bad feeling in my gut. This wasn't just about lights anymore. This was about control. The strange thing was, she didn't even give me a chance to explain. No questions, no discussion, just a cold, hard stare and a demand that we take the lights down. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her mind. She wasn't leaving until she got her way. "I'll give you until tomorrow," she said, before turning and walking away. But she didn't leave just yet. She stood there for a moment, looking at the lights one last time, and I swear, it was like she was daring us to defy her. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, watching her walk down the street. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I knew that smile, no, that smirk, wasn't genuine. It was a sign, a warning. And deep down, I had a feeling this was just the beginning of something much bigger. But what could we do? We didn't want to get into a fight with the HOA, especially not over something as silly as lights. Still, something about the way she looked at me, the way she talked, it left me with a gnawing sense that things weren't going to be as simple as they seemed. What was her real motive? Was this just about the lights, or was there something more? The next day felt like any other, until I checked my mailbox. Inside was the official notice from the HOA, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Violation of HOA rules, it said. My first thought? What rule? We were just putting up some Christmas lights. Who could possibly care? But the more I looked at the paper, the angrier I became. She wasn't messing around. There it was, in black and white. Non-compliant decorations. Excessive brightness. Disrupting the neighborhood's aesthetic balance. I could hardly believe it. This wasn't just a fine for a minor offense. It was a full-blown reprimand. They even had the nerve to include a photo of my house, the lights twinkling merrily in the front yard. Apparently, it was offensive to the neighborhood's delicate ambiance. What was worse? The fine wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about the HOA. The rules were insane, petty, and, honestly, felt like they were designed to make life miserable. I could just imagine her, sitting in her little office, writing these ridiculous notices with a smug smile on her face. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was the ruler of this little suburban kingdom, and we were all just her subjects. But here's the thing, I wasn't ready to be her pawn. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at that piece of paper in disbelief. My wife walked in, holding a cup of coffee, and I could see the same look in her eyes. She knew what was coming. This wasn't the kind of woman you crossed lightly. But I was done playing by the rules. The question was, how far was I willing to go to get back at her? At that moment, a strange thought crossed my mind. What if we did exactly what she wanted? What if we followed every rule to the letter, just like she'd asked? I mean, if they wanted to control everything, then why not give them the ultimate compliance? But with a twist. What if, by following every rule, we could make her life a living nightmare? I wasn't just thinking about the lights anymore. I was thinking bigger. Much bigger. That night I sat down with a pen and a pad, making a list of every ridiculous rule I could remember, and the more I wrote, the clearer it became. The HOA's rules were absurd. Lawn heights, mailbox positions, paint colors, everything down to the most minute detail. I could see it now. The HOA wasn't about making the neighborhood better. It was about power. It was about controlling us, forcing us to fit into their tiny little boxes. But I wasn't about to let them win. The next day, I set my plan into motion. I started with the mailbox. I measured the height, exactly the way the rules said. Then, I moved to the lawn. Every blade of grass had to be trimmed to the correct length according to the HOA's specifications. I followed the rules to the letter, and then some. I even started marking off the sidewalk with chalk to make sure there was exactly the right amount of space between our house and the neighbor's property line. But this wasn't just about following rules. It was about making them feel like they had no control over us anymore. Each step I took was a reminder to her that she was not invincible, and that, sooner or later, she would have to answer for her actions. What happened next was even more satisfying. I went down to the local hardware store and bought the brightest, most obnoxious lights I could find. Not just for Christmas. No, I had a better idea. I strung them across our entire yard, from the front to the back, hanging down from the trees and covering every inch of the house. They blinked, flashed, and pulsated in every color imaginable. It was like a Christmas carnival had exploded all over our property. I stood back and admired my work, knowing this was just the beginning. The next day, she showed up again. This time she wasn't alone. She had 2 other board members with her, and they were all standing at the end of our driveway staring at our house. I could see the veins in her neck pulsing as she tried to contain her fury. I knew it was coming. She marched up to our front door and knocked. I opened it, casually leaning against the frame like it was just another day. "Those lights," she started, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "You're in direct violation of the HOA code. You need to take them down immediately." I smiled. "I thought we were following the rules," I said, stepping aside to let them see the masterpiece I had created. Her face turned redder than a Christmas ornament, and I couldn't help but enjoy every second of it. "Take them down, or we'll fine you for every violation," she spat. I could hear the threat in her words, but I wasn't afraid. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. "I thought these were the exact kind of lights the HOA would approve of." She didn't have an answer. All she could do was stand there, glaring at me, her face twisted in a mix of fury and disbelief. But here's the thing, I wasn't backing down. And just when I thought she was about to lose it, she did something unexpected. She reached into her bag and pulled out a fine, one that was bigger than the first. It was clear. She was playing hardball. But I had a plan, and I wasn't going to let her break me. I smiled to myself, knowing that I had just one more trick up my sleeve. There was no way she could win this, but she wasn't going to give up without a fight, and the game was far from over. It started like any other morning. I was sipping my coffee, watching the sun come up, and thinking about how things had gotten out of hand with the HOA. But then, the doorbell rang. I stood up, half expecting another notice or a letter demanding more fines. I opened the door, and there they were. The HOA president, the same woman with the cold eyes, was standing on my porch, but this time she wasn't alone. There were 2 other people with her. They weren't in suits or anything, just plain clothes, but there was something about the wadi. They moved that made me feel uneasy, like they were ready for something I didn't understand. "Good morning," she said, her voice as cold as ever. "Can we come inside?" I hesitated. It wasn't like we were friends, and after everything that had happened, I wasn't exactly in the mood to entertain her. But before I could say anything, one of her companions stepped forward. "We need to talk about your lights," he said, his voice firm. That's when I felt it. Something wasn't right. But I shrugged it off, thinking maybe they were just going to complain again. "Sure, come in," I said, stepping aside. Big mistake. The moment they crossed the threshold, I knew this wasn't just a conversation about lights anymore. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. I could tell by the way they moved and how they kept glancing at each other that something was about to happen. The president walked into the living room and sat down, crossing her arms. "I've had enough of your games," she said, her voice suddenly low, threatening. "We've tried to handle this the nice way, but now you're going to face the consequences." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Consequences for what? For putting up some lights?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she nodded at the guy standing by the door. He stepped forward and pulled out a set of handcuffs. "What are you doing?" I asked, taking a step back, heart pounding in my chest. "This is not necessary," I said, my voice shaking slightly, unsure if they were really going to go that far. But they were. Before I could say anything else, the man grabbed my wife's arm. "Hey!" I shouted, moving to intervene. But that's when he grabbed me too. "Get off me!" I yelled, trying to pull away. The next few seconds felt like a blur. I was struggling, trying to free myself, but he was too strong. Then the president spoke again, this time with a sickening calm. "If you resist, we'll have no choice but to take further action." That was it. I stood there frozen in shock as my wife was handcuffed in front of me. I could hear her voice breaking as she begged them to stop, but they didn't listen. And that's when I realized just how far they were willing to go. This wasn't about the lights anymore. This was about power, control. They weren't just some petty HOA board anymore. They had become something much darker. I could feel my blood boiling, my fists clenched at my sides. "Take them off her!" I demanded. But the president only smirked. "You should have followed the rules," she said. Her words were like daggers. "You didn't think we'd enforce them, did you? Well, now you see what happens when you mess with us." The man was still holding my wife's arm, his grip tightening. I could see her face pale, the fear in her eyes. But I wasn't going to stand by and let this happen. This was more than just some rule violation. This was personal. I knew we had to do something. But what? I started thinking, piecing together a plan in my mind. But the problem was, I couldn't act. Not yet. Because if I did, it would make everything worse. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I stayed calm. I knew that if I lost it, they'd use that against us. So, I took a deep breath, looked the president in the eye, and said the one thing I knew would shake her to her core. "You just made a huge mistake." She raised an eyebrow, clearly curious, but didn't say anything. "I'm not the kind of guy you want to mess with," I added, my voice steady but filled with an unspoken threat. "You've just crossed a line that's not going to end well for you." She laughed. "You think you scare me?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'm in charge here, and you are nothing more than a rule breaker who got caught." But I saw it, just for a second, her confidence slipping. She was scared. I could see it in her eyes. And that's when I knew. I had them. They thought they had control, but I was about to turn this whole thing around. But the question was, how far would I be willing to go? Would I play their game and fight them with their own rules? Or would I go after them in a way they'd never expect? It was the next morning when the phone call came. I'd barely slept, the weight of what had happened still hanging over me. But then the phone rang, shattering the silence in my house. I didn't even recognize the number, but something told me it was her. The HOA president. "Hello?" I answered, my voice low, wary. "Is this Mr. Your Name?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yeah. Who's this?" "It's me," she said. And for the first time, I could hear something different in her voice. Calm. Almost too calm. "I think we need to talk about this little situation." "Situation?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "You know, the lights and the handcuffs," she replied, clearly enjoying the power she had. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold my anger back. I wasn't going to let her get to me. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about," she said with a laugh. "Your little stunt didn't go unnoticed. You think you can defy the rules without consequences?" There was a silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought maybe she'd finally gotten the message, but no, she wasn't finished. "I'm giving you one last chance to fix this," she said. What does that mean? I asked, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. You can either pay the fine and take the lights down or, well, we'll escalate things. I don't think you want that. I could almost hear the smirk in her voice. I was getting fed up. Let me make this clear, I said, my tone firm. I'm not taking those lights down, and I'm not paying your fine. You've gone too far, and I won't back down. Her silence was deafening. Then she spoke, her voice cold, like she'd been waiting for me to say that. You'll regret this, she warned. I promise you, I'm not going to stop until you pay for what you've done. I hung up before she could say another word. But something about that conversation felt different. She didn't sound like someone who had control anymore. She sounded like someone who was about to lose everything. I wasn't sure how, but I was going to make sure that happened. A plan started to form in my mind, something that would shake her to her core. I wasn't going to fight her on her terms. I was going to turn the tables, but I needed leverage, something powerful enough to make her back down completely. And then it hit me. My wife's 17 Harleys. Each one of them was more than just a bike. They were her pride and joy, her collection of custom-built motorcycles all gleaming in the garage, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship. It wasn't just the money they were worth, it was the sheer emotional value. But that didn't matter to me anymore. If she wanted to play this game, we were going to do it my way. I had an idea, a bold, risky idea, and it was going to shake the foundation of the HOA's control over us. The next morning, I made a few calls. I knew people who didn't care about petty HOA rules. I had a connection with someone who could help me with this, a professional, someone who specialized in getting rid of problems in a way that left no trace. And by that afternoon, the plan was set. I stood in the garage, staring at the motorcycles, the faint smell of gasoline and leather filling the air. These bikes were worth more than most people's houses, but to me, they had become symbols of everything I'd lost. They weren't just bikes. They were a way for me to fight back, and fight back I would. That night, we executed the plan. I won't go into the details, but let's just say it wasn't pretty. The next morning, when the sun rose, there was nothing left of the 17 Harleys but twisted metal and charred remains. The flames had taken everything. The bikes were gone, destroyed beyond recognition. I stood there looking at the wreckage, and a strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. I knew this wasn't over, but it was a message that the HOA couldn't ignore. They had pushed us to this point. They had taken things too far. Within hours, I got the call. It was her, the president. "Did you do it?" she asked, her voice shaking, just a hint of panic in it. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. She already knew. "You're crazy," she spat. "You think you've won?" "No," I said, "but I've made my point." "You'll regret this," she warned again, her voice filled with venom. "I think you've underestimated me," I replied. And with that, I hung up. I knew this wasn't the end of it. This was just the beginning. But the difference was, now I had the upper hand. Now, she was the one who had to worry. She was the one who had to figure out how to deal with me. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I wasn't afraid of the HOA. I had turned the tables. And I had the power now. It had only been a few hours since the bikes were burned, but I could already feel the tension building in the air. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was fired up, and I knew she would be too. That sense of power, that cold confidence. It was like a switch had flipped. I'd seen how she'd looked at me after I hung up the phone, the way her words had trembled. She was rattled, and I loved it. But as much as I enjoyed seeing her squirm, I knew this war was far from over. The phone rang again, and for a moment I thought it might be her again. But it wasn't. It was worse. It was the HOA's lawyer. I could hear the smugness in his voice as he said, "We need to discuss the consequences of your actions." I could feel my pulse racing as I sat down. What did they want now? I wasn't scared. No, I was angry. But I wasn't about to let them think they could intimidate me. "We already discussed everything," I said, my voice steady, though every muscle in my body was tense. "We have nothing to talk about unless you're offering a refund for the fine you gave us for hanging lights." He ignored my jab, as I knew he would. "We're prepared to take legal action if this continues. You have made a public spectacle of your defiance, and we cannot allow this kind of behavior to go unpunished." "Legal action?" I echoed, my anger bubbling up. "You're really going to go that far for a few lights and some harmless fun?" He was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear him adjusting his glasses, trying to find the right words. "The HOA takes these things very seriously," he finally said, "and we will not tolerate any more disruptions." This was it, their final threat. And honestly, I wasn't even worried, because I knew something they didn't. I had a trump card up my sleeve, something that would make everything else fall apart for them. And that's when the idea hit me. What if we took their legal threat and turned it into something that would destroy them from the inside out? The next day, I drove to the local courthouse. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I filed a claim against the HOA. It wasn't just about the bikes anymore. No, this was about something much bigger. This was about exposing them for the corrupt, power-hungry tyrants they truly were. The claim I filed was simple. I wasn't just suing them for the harassment over the lights. I was suing them for every time they'd used their power to bully the other homeowners in our neighborhood. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I was prepared to drag them through the mud. I had gathered evidence, emails, records of complaints from other residents, anything that could show their complete disregard for the people they were supposed to serve. I was going to make sure that their dirty laundry was aired for everyone to see. A few days later, I received a call from the HOA's lawyer again. This time, there was a noticeable shift in his tone. "Mr. Your name. We've reviewed your claim, and we would like to discuss a settlement." I leaned back in my chair, trying to suppress a smile. A settlement? Oh, now they wanted to talk. Funny how the tables had turned. "What kind of settlement?" I asked, playing it cool. "Well," he began, "we are prepared to drop all fines and remove any legal actions, provided you agree to retract your claim and cease any further action against the HOA." I didn't even hesitate. "No deal," I said. "We'll take this to court. I want everyone to know what kind of people you are." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he spoke, his voice much quieter. "You're making a mistake." "Oh, I don't think so," I said, grinning to myself, "because the real mistake would be continuing to hide your dirty secrets." And with that, I hung up. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I'd expected them to fight back, but what I didn't expect was how badly they'd fall apart. The HOA board started to implode. Rumors about their corruption spread like wildfire throughout the neighborhood. Residents who'd been too scared to speak up suddenly found their voices. People came forward with their own stories of being bullied, fined, and threatened for trivial matters. It was like a domino effect. Every time one person spoke up, others followed, and before long the HOA was drowning in scandal. People were demanding answers. They were questioning the board's authority. And worst of all, they were turning on each other. By the time the court date arrived, things had escalated. I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. I knew this was my moment to strike. The HOA president, her smug smile long gone, was sitting across the room, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She knew it was over, but she didn't know how bad it was going to get. The case wasn't about the lights anymore. It wasn't about the fines or the bikes. This was about bringing down an entire system built on control, fear, and greed. And as I looked across the room at the board members, I could see it in their eyes. They were finally realizing they'd made a grave mistake, a mistake they were about to pay for. But just as I was about to take the stand, the lawyer for the HOA stepped forward, a desperate look in his eyes. "We want to settle," he said, his voice shaking. "You want to settle now?" I asked, a smile creeping up my face. "Yes," he said. "We're willing to do anything to make this go away." This was it. The final surrender. But the real question was, how far was I willing to push them? What would be the ultimate price for their reign of terror? The moment they offered to settle, I knew I had them. They were desperate. They thought that by offering to make everything go away, they could just erase their mess and walk away scot-free. But that was never going to happen, not with me. I stood in that courtroom, looking at the lawyer who was practically shaking in his shoes. He was clearly on edge, sweating under the pressure, and I wasn't about to let him or the HOA board off the hook. No, this wasn't going to end with a hands. Hake and a sorry. This was going to end with them paying for everything they'd done. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. "Settle?" I repeated, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You want to settle now, after everything you've put us through? After what you did to my wife?" The lawyer flinched, but I could see the flicker of realization in his eyes. He knew this wasn't about the lights or the bikes anymore. This was about justice, and about making them feel the consequences of their abuse of power. I took a step forward, feeling the weight of every word. "If you think I'm going to let you off the hook with a settlement, you're sorely mistaken," I said, my voice unwavering. "I've spent months fighting this, fighting for what's right, and I'm not going to stop now." The board members were sitting in the back, their faces pale, their eyes darting around as they tried to avoid making eye contact. They didn't know it yet, but their time was up. But then, something unexpected happened. The president, her face twisted in rage, stood up and slammed her fist on the table. "I will not let you ruin everything we've worked for," she shouted, her voice cracking. I saw it then, the fear in her eyes. She wasn't mad, she was terrified. The entire foundation of her control was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She was losing everything. I stayed calm, watching as she paced back and forth, her hands trembling. "You have no idea what you're doing," she yelled. "I'm the president. I'm in charge of this neighborhood. I can destroy you." Her threats were empty now, nothing more than the last gasps of a woman who was losing her grip on everything. I stood up, taking a step toward her, locking eyes. "You're not in charge anymore," I said, my voice low and controlled. "You lost that the moment you crossed the line with us. You lost it the moment you thought you could treat us like dirt." There was a long, uncomfortable silence in the room as the full weight of my words sank in. She was beaten. She knew it. I knew it. But just when I thought it was over, she did something I hadn't expected. She turned to the other board members, pleading with them. "We can't let him win. We have to fight this. We can't just give in." But they were silent, their eyes downcast, unwilling to meet her gaze. The tide had turned. They weren't on her side anymore, and in that moment, I knew I had won. The lawyer finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Mister, your name. We're prepared to offer a compromise. We'll drop all fines, remove any legal action, and—" I didn't let him finish. "No deal," I said, cutting him off. "I'm not interested in your compromise. I want them gone. I want the board disbanded. His face turned white. I don't think we can, he started, but I wasn't going to let him worm his way out. I'm giving you one chance to make this right, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. Disband the board, remove the president from power, and I'll consider dropping the lawsuit. For a moment, no one said anything. Then, slowly, the lawyer nodded. We'll do it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I could hardly believe it, but there it was. They had backed down. The president stood there, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. She opened her mouth, probably to say something else threatening, but then stopped herself. She knew she had no power left. She knew the game was over. And in that moment, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. I'd done it. I'd won. We walked out of the courtroom victorious. It wasn't just about the fine or the bikes anymore. It was about showing them that they couldn't just push people around. It was about taking a stand and making sure they knew there were consequences for their actions. As we stepped into the parking lot, my wife turned to me, a smile slowly spreading across her face. You really did it, she said, her voice filled with awe. I smiled back, the weight of everything lifting off my shoulders. Yeah, I said, but the real victory is knowing they can never do this to anyone else again. As we drove home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. But I knew one thing for sure. The HOA was finished, and it was all because we refused to back down. It was over, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. The board had been disbanded, the president was out, the power had shifted, and the HOA was no longer a force to be reckoned with in our neighborhood. But even as I drove home from that final meeting, something inside me kept wondering, had we really won? Could the damage they'd caused just disappear? Or was there something darker waiting to rise up in their place? I kept thinking about that woman, the HOA president, the way she stood in the courtroom, her pride crumbling with every word I spoke, the way she tried to maintain control until it slipped right through her fingers, and her last look, the look of someone who realized she had lost everything. It wasn't just her job or her power. It was the respect she'd once commanded, the sense of invincibility she had held over everyone in the neighborhood. That was gone, and there was no getting it back. But even as I felt that sense of justice, something gnawed at me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much the HOA had taken from all of us. It wasn't just about Christmas lights. It wasn't just about the bikes. It was about the constant pressure to conform. The way they'd made us feel small. The way they'd used their power to destroy people's lives, one small rule at a time. And all the while, no one ever stood up to them. No one but us. I couldn't help but think about the other residents who had been too scared to speak up, people who had lived in fear for years, knowing that if they stepped out of line they'd be fined, harassed, or worse. How many people had their spirits crushed under the weight of those petty rules? How many lives had been ruined by the desire to control? But as we drove through the neighborhood, I saw something that made my heart swell with pride. The streets were still quiet, but there was something different now. The lights that once seemed like a minor infraction now felt like a victory. It wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about every house on this street, every homeowner who'd been silenced for so long. Now, we all had the power to take back control. We pulled into our driveway, and I looked around. The front yard, once the scene of tension and conflict, was now peaceful. The lights still hung in the trees, sparkling like little beacons of hope. I thought about what we'd done, the sacrifices, the risks, the hours spent planning every move, and I realized that we hadn't just won. We'd changed the rules. We'd taken back what was ours. and we weren't going to let anyone push us around ever again. As we walked into the house, my wife smiled and hugged me tightly. "I can't believe it's really over," she said, her voice full of relief. I hugged her back, feeling the weight of the past few months lift off my shoulders. "We did it," I said softly. "We made sure they'll never hurt anyone again." But then, as I sat down to relax, I received a text message. It was from a neighbor. They asked if I could meet them at the park in a couple of hours. I wondered what it was about. Maybe they wanted to thank me. Maybe they had some other business to discuss. Either way, something told me the story wasn't really over yet. It seemed like the change we'd sparked had set something else in motion. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, curious to see what was coming next. When I arrived at the park, I found several neighbors knitting together, all of them wearing smiles. But there was also a sense of tension in the air, like they were waiting for something big. One of the neighbors stepped forward. "We've been talking," they said, looking at the others, "and we think it's time we start our own neighborhood council. A council that actually listens to people, that respects everyone's rights." I was speechless. For a moment, I just stood there trying to process what they were saying. "You want to start a new council?" I asked. "Yes," the neighbor replied. "We want to make sure no one ever feels powerless like we did. We want a voice, not just some board that sits in a room and decides our fate without ever asking us." I could see it now. This was the beginning of something bigger. It wasn't just about taking down the HOA anymore. It was about reclaiming our community. It was about taking control of our own lives, our own decisions, and making sure no one could ever silence us again. I felt a rush of excitement. For the first time in a long time, I saw the future clearly. We were building something new, something that would empower every person on our street, in our neighborhood, and beyond. This was the start of a movement, one that would spread like wildfire, and I knew that we were at the heart of it. As I walked home that night, I couldn't stop smiling. This was it, the moment when everything changed. Not just for us, but for everyone. We had taken the fight to the HOA, and we had won. But more importantly, we had shown everyone that they could win too, and that was a victory worth celebrating.